Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for
All the
coming
As long as we
today.
have time to chat.
My name is Jess Chipkin. I am the founder of an animal welfare profit called Crate Free USA. For those of you who don't know us, we're an animal welfare nonprofit that's dedicated to improving the standards of animals raised for food. And we do this in several ways. First, we do it through corporate campaigns where we try to influence major companies, grocery chains like Aldi and Costco to change the way they source animals and to use producers that don't confine the animals. The other way we do it is we try to educate consumers about what happens to animals before they get to their plates. We do it through supporting our local farmers. And one of the newer programs we have now is that we have a humane education program where we go into schools of all elementary through high school to educate students, our future consumers, about why all animals should be treated kindly. So the questions we're going to talk about today are questions that the longer I'm involved in this, the more they plague me. And here's some of the questions, like, how do we get food company leaders to really care about animal welfare? How do we get statements that companies put on their websites about what they're going to do about animal welfare to really have meaning and significance to the companies and that they're actually mean something? And the other questions are, why do some companies do so much better than others when it comes to animal welfare? Is it business philosophy? Is it education and awareness of the employees? And the biggest question I always have is, can compassion and profitability really coexist? I like to tell people to think about it this way. Like, you have CEOs of food companies, and I have to believe that a lot of these CEOs have pets at home. They have dogs and cats, and they love their dogs and cats, and they think of themselves as animal lovers. But when they come into the office and get behind their computer, they allow practices that inflict cruelty on millions and millions of animals. Think about it. You could also think about it this way. If we did to domestic animals what we do to farm animals, it would be considered animal cruelty. But if it's farm animals, it's just considered business as usual, and the owner of the company would be applauded for having a sufficient supply chain. So for those of us who truly care about animals and the environment and want to make purchasing decisions that align with their beliefs, that's why these are very, very important questions today. And I'm so excited about our panels today. But before we get started, I do want to thank a few people. Our friends at DePaul University Center for Animal Law. First, I'd like to thank Brett Davinger, who's the Associate Director here, Ken Cunoff, from the International Institute for Animal Law, for co-sponsoring the event. Professor Margaret Livingston, who's the faculty director here, and this center really couldn't exist. Oh, hi, I didn't see you. Okay. Thank you, Margaret. Without this, the center really wouldn't exist. And of course, our panelists, Marc, Maisie, Zach, and Kelly, and panel moderator Bob, who will now introduce themselves, and I will now turn it over to you, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Jess.
You're welcome.
I've worked with Jess for years. Just admire her work so much. It's so important. I don't usually read my biography, but I don't want to filibuster. So, hi, I'm Bob Benenson, and since April 2021, I've published Local Food Forum online, covering this full spectrum of issues affecting the local food ecosystem. I did something very different in my professional life, for most of my professional life, covering politics in Washington, D.C. But I've always been passionate about food. It's how I was raised. I was an early adopter of the good food movement, shopping at Whole Foods and farmers markets before it was cool. 40 years ago, I married an Illinois farm girl. And in 2011, we fulfilled a dream and moved to Chicago. I established food advocacy as a second career, working for a nonprofit, and I started and have continued Local Food Forum because the grassroots local food community needs its own media platform, and it did not happen. I have business cards if you're interested in learning more, which I hope you are. I also do contract work for Naturally Chicago, which is essentially the trade association for entrepreneurs, investors, and other folks on the business side of the good food movement. In addition, I'm a Michigan State University graduate, in case there are any other Spartans in the house. I could go on, but I don't have time. So I'm first going to turn it over to Basie, who's here because of the miracles of modern technology, and then we'll go down the line.
Thank you all. I really appreciate getting to participate virtually because this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I spent 30 years as the Chief Strategy and Brand Officer for Bon Appetit Management Company, operating over 1,000 cafes in 33 states. And we took on many issues related to sustainability in the supply chain, including animal welfare, working most deeply on laying hens, on broiler chickens, and on pork. Or pigs, we should say, for pork. And I am the author of a book on how you can build a brand based on sustainability and be more profitable. So really in the bailiwick of today's talk, and that's called You Can't Market Manure at Lunchtime and Other Lessons from the Food Industry for Creating a More Sustainable Company. So thanks for having me.
Why don't you go next, Kelly?
Sure. Thank you, Bob. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Holovsky, and I'm the Director of Social and Environmental Responsibility at ButcherBox. ButcherBox is a direct-to-consumer meat and seafood company that serves the lower 48 states. And we are on a mission to bring better meat and seafood to every table. And what I love about our mission is that it sounds really humble, bringing better meat and seafood to every table, but unfortunately, it's very aspirational in this country. I think this room probably knows that 60 to 70% of most of the meat that folks are able to buy in the grocery store has antibiotics or added hormones in it. And I think that is really kind of the driving force behind ButcherBox's reason for being. We believe that Americans deserve better. And we're both through the way that we do business by offering better meat and seafood to our customers. And we have over 400,000 members across the country getting monthly boxes from ButcherBox. We do it through individual level change as well as working at the federal level to advance legislation, including Proposition 12, that improves the well-being of animals in this country. And I think what is really cool is that when you make change for the animals, it also has not only an impact on the quality of our food, but often the environment as well. And obviously those things don't always happen in the direction we want. Sometimes when you over-index on one variable, you have some negative consequences in the other. And I think that holistic approach to thinking about the planet, the animal, and what the quality of the food on your plate looks like, that's something we're always trying to balance in the products that we provide. So excited to share more today.
I'm Zach. I run a restaurant in the suburb of Crystal Lake, Illinois called Duke's Ale House and Kitchen. Took it over from my family in 2008. They've been running it since 1994. We became a green certified restaurant in about the time I took over in 2010. So now we have a 3-star green certification. So we care a lot about the environment and the impact that we make on it. So we make sure that the decisions we make reflect that morality, and we try to remain a successful business. And I think the proof is in the pudding there. But I kind of got into the humane treatment of animals a little more by accident. You know, being a chef by trade and coming out of culinary school and hospitality school, I started working at fine dining restaurants where we had relationships with farmers. And I knew that was the only way to cook, is really having somebody that stood behind their product that you could meet with and talk to and almost customize your ingredients to fit your menus. And I thought that that was so cool because the flavor and the process of cooking was so much simpler and better. And I started learning how much more nutritious it was. And then I started learning the fact that these animals were treated better, they were raised better, the vegetables were raised better, and not only did they taste better, they were more nutritious, and it just all seemed to make a lot of sense to me. So in pursuing flavor, I happened upon environmentalism because I wanted to make sure that these heirloom varieties of vegetables and meats and everything and flavors and nutrition were preserved. So we continue with that mission every day in our restaurant. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marc Ayers. I'm the Illinois Director for, hope I get this right, the Humane World for Animals. We just changed our name. For those that are familiar, we were formerly known as the Humane Society of the United States. And I always say HSUS, but I'm gonna have to correct my wording now. Humane World for Animals. I've been with the Humane World for Animals for coming up on 10 years. It'll be 10 years, I think this summer, actually. And I'm also the exclusive lobbyist for Humane World for Animals in Illinois, lobbying primarily at the state capitol, trying to pass everything pro-animal related that you can think of, from companion animals to wildlife, of course, farm animal protection work, threatened and endangered species, captive wildlife, you name it, we work on it at the state capitol. We're in session now, we're in session this week. And so I'll be going back down after this and going back to the Capitol lobbying and doing what we do best. We also serve as defensive lobbyists at the Capitol, stopping all the bad stuff that comes up every year. And believe it or not, there's tons and tons of bad bills filed every year that actually hurt animals and roll back protections for animals. So we are that force at the Capitol that stops those things from passing. Before coming to Humane World, I was the policy director for the environment and rural affairs under a few governors ago, under Governor Quinn and Lieutenant Governor Sheila Simon, where I was a director for the environment and rural affairs in that office for a full term. And before that, did about 4 years in office with the Illinois Institute for Legal, Legislative, and Policy Studies. So all that to say, I'm kind of a policy wonk and legislative nerd. Around the Capitol, the electeds know me as the animal guy, so you can just call me the animal guy. Industry lobbyists have another name for me, and none of those are repeatable in polite company. But I do have business cards up here as well, for those that want to get in touch after the meeting. And I just want to say thanks to DePaul for the invite, and Jess, thank you for letting us be part of this panel discussion today.
Thank you, Mark. By the way, I forgot to mention, I am wearing my uniform. The shirt, which is partially obscured, says support your local farmers. It's farmers market season. Be out there. We're going to try and hit 4 areas. I don't have a hook. The walk-off music won't start, but let's try and keep our answers really to the point. The first one is how companies balance profitability with moral responsibilities. Companies that prioritize sustainability and animal welfare often have leadership teams who are personally committed to those values. This can result in corporate missions that emphasize ethical sourcing and production practices. Conversely, other businesses focus primarily on profit margins or consumer demand for cheaper products, leading to less emphasis on humane practices. I'm going to start with you, Mark, because you have kind of an overview covering all these issues. Then pick the next person to talk. We'll try and mix it up because having been the last person on panels before, it's not a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, let's try to maybe set the stage a little bit for what we're trying to accomplish here. I mean, I think that the sheer volume of this industry it's quite staggering. And when I tell Illinois advocates about the numbers, it just blows their mind. I mean, we're talking about roughly 95 billion land mammals a year slaughtered and raised just for food. And the vast majority of those are animals that are used for chickens or their poultry or pigs and cattle, things raised for food consumption. 95 billion. Most of those are in livestock facilities we call CAFOs, where they're experiencing intense confinement. Pigs and chickens, they're in cages where they can't even turn around or even flap their wings. That's the volume. 85 billion of that 95 are chickens alone. And so that is predominantly the hugest sector that we see in the livestock space. And I think when I try to explain to folks what are we trying to accomplish, it's to make their lives better. What does that mean? Well, I try to do it through legislation at the state level and federal level. But what we're trying to do is flip this model. Right now, the model is set to where every day is a bad day for these animals. Every day in confinement is a bad day, and every day is worse than the other. And the only good day that they have is when they're put out of that misery. And that's a horrible model to be behind. And we're trying to encourage companies to change that model. The good news is that they are slowly, but they are changing it. Around 2,000 companies have pledged so far to eliminate the worst practices, like I just mentioned, from their production line. But 2,000, we need way more than that to really have an effect on this industry. And so I think the goal for us is to flip that model where every day is a good day for these animals. And yes, they're gonna have one bad day, and that's the day they're gonna be euthanized and then put on a store shelf to be eaten by a consumer. But that model can be flipped. And the great news is that there is a working, viable alternative that's already been in play by local farmers, proven that they can do this and do it sustainably and do it well, that treats animals well. But it's how do we convince the large corporations, the restaurants to do it? And luckily, we have some good folks up here that are doing just that. So maybe I'll hand it off to you to say what you're doing next.
Very professional segue. Impressed. I'm not gonna do that well, but I think that sums it up really well, in the challenges that we face, and gives that nice broad scheme of, of the real impact that we still need to make in our decisions. I believe all of us here, have those ambitions, and it's hard to see, when I meet people, like, just be like, oh, that person's the opposition. I don't meet those people in the restaurant, it's like, or where I'm out and about. So it seems to me that everybody wants these things to happen, and the more humane treatment of animals. And the reason it's not happening faster is, beyond me. But I think, as, not to just put myself as an example, but, to just say, when getting back to the question of, compassion and profitability being involved in the same business, I think when I first came into the restaurant, I was young and naive, and I had ideals and morality and things that I wanted to do. And I did those despite the numbers. I remember my parents, I remember vendors, I remember everybody having doubt in me and saying it's not going to work. And I'm like, I know it's going to work because I believe in it. And I just feel like, I put profitability aside, and I'm not asking everybody to do that. I just knew that, it worked for me. And I was able to pursue my passion, and I put that in front. Now that I'm older and I start to look at numbers alongside my compassion, it's a little more difficult. I have a family to raise. I have, employees that are looking for benefits. I need to stay competitive in the market. And, it's a little bit different now, but I always go back to those roots of why am I doing this? What example have I made? And what example am I going to continue to make to my kids and my family and the consumers? And they keep driving me, and they keep, telling me, to keep going, especially when we've seen things like COVID happen, which was detrimental to restaurants, but they came out and ordered our French fries, despite them being soggy in to-go containers. And, it was really heartwarming to see that, like I said in the beginning, people really want this. They want to see the businesses to succeed that have their heads on straight, and that want to go towards a more sustainable future and protect the welfare of the animals. So I think the future is encouraging, and the compassion and profitability can work within the same business. Sure.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because profitability and morality right now, I would say the way the system is set up is most folks don't feel bad about the meat that they eat because they don't know what the status quo is. And I think if consumers understood or had trust in the meat that they were buying at the grocery store, then, or if they knew what was going on, they would not be buying meat as often as they would. There was some data from last year that I was just reading recently that said only 4 in 10 Americans trust what they buy at the grocery store is humanely raised or the animals are treated well. And I think surprisingly, ButcherBox has grown. We must be getting to those folks who understand the problem. And I think it's our job to do a better job communicating how unique it is to have meat that is no antibiotics or added hormones or raised not in a crate or not confined, or what does pasture raised and free range mean? And how does that improve not just the animal's life, but the quality of the meat on your plate? So I think education is a huge piece of it, but I think the other thing that kind of governs how we do business and how we ensure that it's not just like a fancy marketing phrase of, bringing better meat and seafood to every table, is that Butcher Box is a B Corp, a benefit corporation. So this is it's a third-party certification that our company achieved in 2020, and we're only just celebrating 10 years this year. And so we were always kind of, the ideals on which we were founded have always existed, but in 2020, we decided we need to actually cement it into our legal documents. And so not only is it written into the way that we legally are recognized in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where we're held, but every 3 years, we have to demonstrate our compliance to the B Corp standards, which evaluate us on our governance, how we treat our customers, our employees, our workers, and the environment. So we have to meet a certain score. In the previous version, they just came up with a new version recently, but we had to meet a certain score on that rigorous 300 question certification or audit in order to be recognized and use the B label on our products. So every one of Butcher Box's products has this label, and it's something that a lot of textile and food companies who are in business to do something better have. And I think we find that really important because customers, we've got a lot of different labels coming our way when we make decisions at the grocery store. And we feel like that alone at the company level is really important to signaling that we are not just trying to, meet shareholders' expectations. And in fact, we're a private company, so we don't have to answer to anyone but ourselves.
Maisie, please.
Yeah, well, I don't think that profitability and morals are at odds, or they may be at odds in some ways, but I don't think that they are diametrically opposed. I think there's a way to achieve both. As you heard, people don't trust what's being sold at grocery stores. There's a lot of cynicism about the food supply chain or about big business altogether. But at the same time, if you look at searches for things like sustainable goods, they're up like 70+%. So people want better products, better defined as better for them, better for the world, better for the animals. Yet they have a hard time believing that companies are doing these things right. So I think if you can convince people through being authentic and transparent that your morals are embedded in your supply chain, that you can drive higher sales, and you can also in some ways reduce costs. Those are your ways to profitability, right? Higher revenue and lower costs. You can get people to come to your restaurant more often, to spend more money at your grocery store, or look at your costs. We only think about product cost when we talk about animal welfare, about how it impacts your product cost. But in your business, there's lots of other costs. Your greatest cost is probably actually labor. And we are all in a crunch for employees now. When you bring your morals to your business, you also attract a different type of employee, and that employee will probably stay longer if you're aligned with their morals. So I think that we have to get away from this dichotomy of morals versus profitability and say, how can morals actually enhance profitability? And I think we're going to get into more throughout today's discussion, so I'll leave it at that point.
Thanks, Maisie. And yes, we are, because the second question is kind of bit of a Venn diagram and overlap a bit with first. Enhancing animal welfare and environmental standards without losing profits. How do we ensure supply chains align with ethical standards without significantly impacting profitability? We'll examine this multifaceted challenge in terms of balancing cost, quality, and animal welfare. And I'm going to go right back to you, Maisie, because Bon Appetit has been such a trailblazer and has succeeded for such a long time. Setting the piece for the 3 Ps: people, planet, profit. And so why don't you talk about the internal thinking during years at Bon Appetit in approaching this issue?
Thanks so much for those kind words. I mean, I think that as this question really focuses on supply chains, that's a really, really key piece to that. And when we talk about the work of sustainability, often when I say to people, like, I work in sustainability, they picture, and I'm sure the same thing at Butcher Box, like that we're out in the fields, like with the animals. And it turns out that most of the work of sustainability is sitting behind a computer with a bunch of spreadsheets and making phone calls to different people at different parts of your supply chain and saying, can you do this a little differently? How do you do this? And the times that we do get to visit, and I really recommend that everybody gets out and does see their supply chains in person, it's often not like pastoral fields. It's, even if we're talking about cage-free hens, for example, they're still in barns. They're still in a closed space, right? If we're talking about sows that aren't in gestation crates, they're still spending their whole lives indoors, and they're still probably in farrowing crates. So when we talk about the work of supply chain, I think we have to really celebrate it and support those people within our organizations that do that work. That said, if you do that work and you go visit your suppliers and you do understand what they're doing, you will also create a partnership with your supply chain that will pay dividends beyond what you would normally think of as a transactional relationship. And we heard about customers showing up for soggy French fries during COVID. Well, also, if you've got those tight supply chain alignment, because you've made these true partnerships that are based on price, but also based on values and on knowing each other, then when things go down, like COVID and supply chains are completely disrupted, you will have people you can count on, and you will have partners in problem solving to ensure that you get your product. So there's always a way of turning a challenge into an opportunity.
Absolutely. Kelly, why don't you talk a bit, because we were talking about some of your sourcing for Butcher Box, and whether you rely on a stable group of sources or if you're always looking at prospecting.
Yeah, so Butcher Box has a variety of meat and seafood options, and I won't go into all of them, but for each of those protein categories, we have some kind of a variety, a continuum of the scale of who we work with. And because Butcher Box serves so many members, we sometimes work with smaller producers, sometimes have to work with larger ones. But the way that we kind of hold them all accountable is through the standards that we have set internally, our sourcing standards. So we have, for each protein category, identified what we want an animal's life to look like at the baseline. And then, of course, we also seek to provide proteins that are like best in class, like the most pasture raised bucolic option that you can have. But knowing that not everyone is going to pay for that premium. And so what we like to say is the variety that we offer allows the bar is being raised to a much higher standard than what you would get, but folks can kind of vote with their dollar on, depending on what values matter most to them. And so we use Certified Humane and Global Animal Partnership, which is an auditing group kind of that was a nonprofit spun out of Whole Foods. Gosh, I don't even know how many years ago, but those are two land standards that we use. And then for seafood, we use Responsible Fisheries Management and the Marine Stewardship Council as the two auditing bodies. And there are a lot of different groups that do work like this, but we have intentionally selected these partners because we believe that they're auditing and visiting the farms or the ranches annually, and we believe in the standards that they've set. So I think that's really important. And then I think the other piece for us is that when you're balancing profitability, what I've found is that the members who come to Butcher Box because of our high standards, we ask them in surveys, those are the best members that we have. Those are the folks who understand what value Butcher Box provides. Like, we're trying to do the challenging work of sorting through all the claims and bringing you something you can trust every month. And those members show my C-suite that every financial metric, whether it's how much money they spend with us, how often they're ordering. Maybe they had to order twice in a month because they needed so much. All of those metrics, they churn less, they don't cancel. And so if that for me is the most helpful metric to remind my team or my executive team about, is like, these members are the best. And so we need to continue telling this story so we get more folks to our doors who care.
Zach, you, as a restaurateur, you can source hyper locally. So why don't you talk about the process in choosing your vendors and whether you have more and more as the sector grows, do you have more potential sources coming to you?
It's a great question. I always love answering it because we were at the beginning of the local food movement, and wasn't quite blossoming in the suburbs, and hence the discouragement from opening a sustainable restaurant in the suburbs in the middle of a recession. But despite the knowledge and expertise I was given, I still did it. But I had established a couple vendors that we still continue to work with. But going out to the suburbs, I'm like, I'll just go to the farmers markets. That's going to be my source. And so I go to the farmers markets, and food people, like you said, they connect in all sorts of ways, and they want to grow themselves. So it's just funny visiting these farmers, and I'd be like, I need 50 pounds of beets. Like, well, we have 10, but you can talk to this person about getting some more. So, but that beet farmer, all of a sudden, she started growing the amount of beets that we needed. Now she grows for 9 months out of the year, she grows enough beets for us, and she grows a specific variety for us. So working with the vendors is that's a great demonstration of that relationship. And immediately comes to mind also that the first episode of Portlandia, when they go and meet the chicken, it has a name and and everything. But we had that relationship with Slagle Family Farm. We got to go out there. We would meet the animals, and then the next day they'd ship them to us, or that same week. So it was like, and after seeing them raised, and the way that they were produced was just so cared for along the whole process. It was just really eye-opening. So when you get those types of experiences, it really just grows your passion to really do that again. And so we started working with more farmers, and I was going to the farmers market, but all of a sudden the farmers market was coming to our door. Our vendors started with like, we grow produce. Here's a basket of free vegetables. What do you want us to grow for you? And it was so interesting to see that change. And now we have, as opposed to trying to just get enough from 5 or 6 different farmers, we had farmers growing specific things for us. While they grow a whole bunch of different things, now we can use multiple vendors, and they can grow something special for us. So, they always can recommend somebody who might have it that doesn't. So on very small scale and supply chains, that connection and that relationship with the food and the people growing, it is really invigorating. And I think that that helps with the transparency of what we're doing, is that we have those relationships. That farmers come eat at our restaurant to eat the food they grew, and they're part of it. And we can point out these celebrities in our restaurant, to our other guests. So it's really cool to be wholly connected to the community and everything like that. So I think, growing from that, I don't know how that would be on a larger scale for a large scale restaurant, but I think that there's something to build on there.
So do any of the farmers come in and they see somebody order something and they lean over and say, I grew that?
In so many words, yes. I mean, like, we have farmers that have come up to us and just been like, I can't wait to get my name on your menu. Like, we moved to this town to start our farm, and we really want to get our name on it. And it makes me blush a little bit. It's really cool to hear that we've inspired people to not only to provide their food for a restaurant in their community. So it's really honorable to
Great,
do
you're
that.
doing wonderful things.
Yeah.
Marc, you're not on the profit and loss side as a nonprofit advocate, but you have to confront people who argue that, you can't grow sustainably and be financially sustainable. So how do you address that?
Yeah, it's really it's been interesting, some of the remarks that we get from industry, whether it's pork, or mainly I've been dealing with poultry farmers. But we did in Illinois file a bill 2 years ago statewide that would limit the production and sale of eggs on store shelves and production if they came from caged facilities. And you would have thought it was World War III to the poultry farmers, the big ones, not just in Illinois, but around the country. And of course, their argument was money. You know, how I just spent X amount of money on cages. I can't go cage free. But I think that's where we had a really good conversation, which was, I would characterize those conversations as they weren't overtly hostile to the bill. It wasn't a hell no, it was, well, what's the phase out period? What's the timeline to do this? How long do we have? And so it was good to hear that it wasn't just a no, it was, well, how long? And it's true. I mean, they did spend a lot of money on cages. And so some were brand new cages and some of the shelf life of those cages are around a decade. And so we asked them, well, is a 10-year phase out good for you? Well, I don't know. And so a lot of back and forth with the industry, but overall it was, I'm receptive, but how long do we have? And so to me, that was a really encouraging sign. Let's remember there's around 40% of the market in the US is already more or less cage free. 10 years ago, that was probably half, if that. So we've made extreme progress by consumer demand and gone from single digits to 40% in just a few short years. It's really impressive. But I would still argue that we need state legislation and hopefully federal. State's probably easier than federal at this juncture. But around 15 states have a law on the books that try to regulate how animals are confined in a cage or crated in their production line. 15 states. Michigan just did it. It builds on the progress of California with Prop 12, which we'll talk about probably later, the most progressive farm animal protection law in the world that California passed. I think in 2018, it was just monumental to the world. Having the 5th largest economy in the world do this it sent shockwaves around the world, what California did. But when we did the bill in Illinois, that was just paltry. I mean, we had industry lobbyists calling my phone, just, what is this? Why are you doing this? And we can't do this, and just flipping out. And it was, well, hang on, let's negotiate. Let's talk about this. And I think we can find some common ground here, but we did not file that bill this year because of the avian bird flu. And so we didn't want to be coming off as unreceptive to how hurt they are right now and offend them further by filing another cage-free egg bill. And they were actually they said thank you in some polite way. They didn't come out of their mouth, but I got a sense of them being thankful that we didn't file the bill this year. But we have to keep filing this bill in Illinois and other states to hold them accountable, because the 2,000, I think, corporations and businesses that we have that have pledged to go cage-free or not use cages for pork, we need the bill to hold them accountable. A pledge is great, but a bill really holds them accountable. If we give you a date of 10 years, that's it. You know, 9 years, and then they say, well, we need 15 more years. We're not playing that game. We have to have a state bill with an effective date to truly hold some of the biggest actors accountable.
Okay, great. We're gonna move on to the next area, consumer demand and awareness. While some ethical practices may have a small upfront cost, learn how companies are embracing these values can enhance their brand reputation, foster consumer loyalty, and even achieve cost savings in the long term due to efficient, sustainable practices. I'm going to preface this a little because we were having a conversation about the high cost of cheap food. When I got into this professionally, you know, the realities of, you know, conventional food that is not as healthy, is not as sustainable, is not as humane, is not as fairly produced, have long-term costs that people need to wrap their minds around. Unfortunately, for generations now, we've had a society where people were indoctrinated to shop for food on 2 things: price, low price, and convenience. This started to shift with the good food movement gaining traction. We gained a lot of ground during COVID because a lot of people had more time to think about what they were eating and how they're eating. Younger people, people a lot younger than me, have been really moving this, accelerating the growth of this sector. And then inflation, which we had after COVID and is now kicking back in with a vengeance. You know, the high cost of cheap food was hard to talk about when it was here. But when it's here, it's not that hard. And then if we get enough inflation, it may end up being there. It is cheaper to get pasture-raised eggs at the farmer's market than it is to get it, conventional eggs in the supermarket. So Kelly, why don't you start off? Because, in terms of marketing your business, you are messaging to people about why this matters.
Yeah, so I think we are messaging, but we definitely can be doing a better job, I would say, because I think I'll just share a little bit about the story of ButcherBox, and I think how the growth of our business is really an example of how meaningful this message is to Americans. So our founder, his wife has an autoimmune disease that the guidance they were given was that she should eat a lot more grass-fed, grass-finished beef to improve her health. And so when they tried to look for that in the Boston metro area, they were not able to get it. And then they had to go really far outside the city to find it. And then they were buying a whole share of a cow and having to figure out how to divvy it up. And long story short, about 10 years ago, ButcherBox was founded on a Kickstarter. And I think the goal was to raise 25,000 just to help better distribute the cows that he was buying. And within like 2 days, it was a $250,000 Kickstarter. And then over the last 10 years, I think last year our revenue was 550 million. And that has been over 500 million for the last probably 3 years or since I've been here. And so I just say that because I think while the larger players in the industry do dominate not just direct to consumer, but also many aspects of the industry, whether it's production and processing or farming itself, I think that just our example of growth demonstrates that customers care and are willing to pay more because our products are not cheap. And to me, this is just super important. I didn't share, but my background is in public health with a focus on food systems. And so that's why I was so interested to work at ButcherBox, because we really were thinking about not just the animal's health, the human's health and the environment. It's all kind of part of the same system. And so I really feel that to me is one of the things that's most consumers care most about themselves first. But what we know is that when we ask them, animal welfare is second on their list. And I think that's why we've grown so quickly and our business has sustained year over year.
Yep. Zach, you have the names of a lot of your sources on your menu. So that's kind of a projection to people that, if you're one of the good guys, we're going to shout you out.
Yeah, absolutely. The example of I want to touch on this second, the example of the prices leveling out, especially with the eggs right now, and conventional versus local sustainable. We had during Super Bowl season a few years ago, we had done wings in the past and people wanted us to bring them back. And I was just like, well, there's only 2 per animal and you serve 8 of them on a plate. I'm like, I don't see that as a very sustainable dish. But I was pushed by the customers to make a decision but all the vendors, the large vendors were out of chicken. And if you wanted to order them, it was an extremely high price. I'm like, all right, I'll reach out to one of my farmers just to see. And I'm like, I know you don't have any, but I'm just going to ask anyways. And he had overabundance of chicken wings and he was looking to get rid of them. His prices were less than the conventional producers. So it is interesting when you're able to tap into different markets, and have yourself diversified in that sense that you can actually access ingredients at a better price and a better quality and a more humane way. But I'm trying to go back to the original question, but as far as keeping the customer loyalty along with that, I think that that we do that as a community by shopping at the farmers markets, customers seeing us there. They know the proof is in the pudding. They can also talk to our vendors. We not only market our vendors, but the vendors are proud to be on there, and they'll market us when they see our customer or future customers at the farmers market. So it does work in a way like we were talking about earlier. Maisie was talking about earlier with the hidden costs or the hidden benefits of practicing a more humane system. I think that's one of those things, keeping labor and training down by retaining employees that care about the same things you do, but also using the marketing of your vendors in those relationships to help continue to grow your business.
Marc, why don't we go to you next? In your conversations with farmers, producers, advocates, lawmakers, how much of this element of this will make you look good? This will help you market to a changing constituency, customer base that is looking for better.
Yeah, I know they're looking for better. I think the argument that industry always uses is, well, if this passes, prices go up. That's not always the case. Just look at the world as is right now. It's the price argument is all over the map. And I think it's interesting. And one thing that irks me the most about some of the industrial large scale CAFOs that are raising these animals in horrible conditions, when they talk to legislators and the media especially, is they say, well, we're feeding the world. That's how important we are. We're feeding the world. No, they're not. They're not doing that. They're not even feeding their own state, not feeding their own town that they live in. There's food deserts everywhere you look. And it's hard to say that when they're shipping cheap pork and poultry to China. That may not be happening now with the tariffs in place, and that's another interesting debate is what these tariffs might be looking like with the US and China trade. But it's never, I think there's a sense at the Capitol, at least in Illinois and probably abroad, that this is a very popular thing to be doing. And I think we've done numerous action alerts on our poultry bill in Illinois, generated tons of calls for that to electeds. And those calls then in turn scared industry to hire more lobbyists to stop it because they're so scared. But I think that's a really good thing to see is that when they're scared, we benefit because they know what we're going to do. In the long run, we always win these fights. When the public votes with their dollar, and every time they sit down to eat and they stand up for animals by doing that, and they're on the store shelves, whether it's Butcher Box, your restaurant, they're picking who they want to support or not support. And I think we're seeing time and time again that price is not always the factor. That when asked, they want to know, is the product that I'm consuming, was that animal treated well? And they feel better about purchasing that item. They're appalled when they see the photos and video footage of the factory farms. They're just appalled by it. And so I think it's a really good sign that they're so nervous about bills like this, and certainly with Prop 12. But I also think there's some other low-hanging fruit that we need to address here in the state, which is like with WIC funding. 32 states, all of our neighbors allow WIC funding to cover any sort of carton of eggs that they want for WIC funding, whether it's cage-free, pasture raised, whatever, it's funded by WICs in those states. Illinois does not allow for that. It only allows for the cheapest dozen possible, which is almost always caged dozen white. And so we're trying to fix that now by kind of making that playing field more level and bringing Illinois up to the other 32 states and bring that parity in line. And that may even require a bill. I think if DHS says, we'll just fund that going forward, we don't even need a state bill for that.
Right.
And so I think there's some really easy things that we can work on to bring that cost factor down to a minimum.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maisie, your company was founded, it's stock and trade, is that there were better food service. What were the challenges in breaking the mold that food service has to be really cheap, sources have to be lowest bid?
Well, when Bon Appetit Management Company was founded, the whole premise, as you said, was to bring great food into the contract feeding environment. So into institutional markets like college cafeterias and corporate settings. And it was about interrupting the conversation that had always been about lowest cost as the only reason that you would pick your food service company, to start talking about food quality and that you would pay more, but you would get more. And that may be a niche market that's willing to pay more to get more. But Bon Appetit at this point is about a $1.8 billion company. So it's a niche, but it's not a little niche, you know? Marc mentioned that there's 15 states that have bills around confinement. Any time that animal welfare has been on the ballot, the animals have won. Every single time, voters have decided that they want to support better practices for farm animals. And some of them have been by like 67%, like landslides, right? And so we know that consumers want this. We know that they think this is better for them, for the planet, for the animals, and that they're going to value this. So we know we can build a business around it. When I wrote You Can't Market Manure at Lunchtime, a lot of it is based on my experiences, but I also interviewed 12 other really sustainability legends. One of them was Gary Hirschberg, who was the founder of Stonyfield Organic Yogurt. And one of the things that he talked about when I interviewed him for the book was that at Stonyfield, their gross profits were smaller than their competitors' net profits. Think about that. Their kind of top line big profit number was smaller than their competitors' net profits. And so when they talked about things like marketing budgets, it was essentially zero, right? Like so little compared to what the big guys could spend. And so the way that he marketed Stonyfield Organic Yogurt was talking about these issues that are sometimes controversial, that are eye-catching, that create a conversation, and really leading with values, going after a segment of the market, not the full market, but a segment of the market that was willing to pay more for this. And Stonyfield grew to be a huge company by many standards as well, eventually acquired by Grupo Danone and on, right? I talked to Walter Robb. Kelly mentioned Global Animal Partnership, and we talked about the founding of Global Animal Partnership and what the expectations of their customers at Whole Foods were around animal welfare. These are issues that people who are paying for your product care about. Every survey, every election, it always comes up, you know, first, second, third as an important issue. So this can be the secret to unlocking your marketing in many ways.
Yeah, and surveys over the years have shown there's a lot of reasons to eat pasture-raised, grass-fed meat. It can be local. A lot of us think is more delicious, richer tasting, but time and again, the top reason that people were seeking sustainably produced meat was animal welfare, that they cared. We're going to do a quick lightning round, short break, and then we'll take Q&A. But get out your pens because this is the calls to action. Steps for positive impact. How do we bridge the gaps between different stakeholders, business leaders, environmental, animal welfare advocates, consumers? Keep the dialogue going and uncover actionable ideas that prioritize business success and the well-being of animal and the environment. I'm going to turn to our panel advocate, Marc, to start this.
Yeah, so I think I've been a broken record with Prop 12. I keep saying that every time I get a chance to talk about California, and it's Prop 12 passed in 2018 via a ballot measure, and it passed with I think 64% of the vote around there. So a huge overwhelming majority of that passed in California. And Prop 12, we kind of refer to it as the most progressive farm animal protection law anywhere in the world. And to kind of sum it up, it prohibited the in-state production and sale of food products from mother pigs, egg-laying chickens, and veal if they came from cages or crates. But the best thing about Prop 12 was that if you were a livestock producer in another state and you raise your animals with those methods, you could not sell your products to California. Now, remember, this is the 5th largest economy in the world. They want to sell their products to California. And so this proposition sent shockwaves throughout the world. Of course, it was fought vigorously, it still is, by mainly the national pork producers who was leading the charge against it. And they have fought every year since its passage to repeal it. Remember, we took this all the way to the United States Supreme Court. I mean, it's that rare that an animal issue gets that far up the chain in the judicial branch. We won 5-4, which is winning in the Supreme Court, as you all know, is probably a rare thing. 5-4, it was upheld. It's a law of the land. They didn't go away. They're still fighting it, and they're not going to go away. And so every chance there's a bill filed. Now the vehicle is the farm bill, which is negotiated every 5 years. They've been inserting language year over year to repeal Prop 12 in the farm bill, and they're literally doing that right now as we speak. There was the King Amendment that was a kind of a similar version of repealing states' rights to protect animal welfare. There was the EATS Act that tried repealing Prop 12. And now I have to read it because I forgot the name. It's the Food Security and Farm Protection Act. It's a Senate Bill 1326 in the United States Senate to repeal Prop 12 and other state laws regarding farm animal protection. And so I would ask everyone here to write U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, who is a member of the Senate Ag Committee, and have him vote no on the Prop 12. We call the Prop 12 fix. Have him vote no on the Prop 12 fix. But there will be a similar version filed in the United States Congress. I don't think that bill has been filed just yet, but it will be filed any day now. So if your member is Congresswoman Bazinski, which is my Congresswoman, she's in the committee, and Ag. Congressman Jonathan Jackson is in the committee, and Congressman Eric Sorensen. Those three serve as Democratic members of the Ag Committee. They all should be getting phone calls to vote no on the Prop 12 fix. There is a huge double-sided fact sheet outside that talks about Prop 12 and what the Prop 12 repeal will do. It's devastating. It cannot pass. It cannot be included in any version in the Farm Bill. So there's also a digital version of this. If you want to, I can email it to you. There's hyperlinks and facts. There's action alerts that you can hyperlink to. But that to me is the single biggest takeaway of this talk for me is opposing the Prop 12 fix. We cannot have any of these farm animal protection laws repealed. They're just too important. So thank you.
Yeah, the EATS Act was some kind of absurd acronym.
Ending
Yeah.
agricultural trade suppression.
There we go. It was so outlandishly, transparently absurd. They actually had to change the name.
They had to change the name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kelly, why don't you?
I can't emphasize that enough, reaching out to your representatives. ButcherBox has been working with the private sector, including Bon Appetit Management Company, to protect Proposition 12 and a similar law that passed in Massachusetts called MA Question 3. And really, we got involved in this work because of our supplier partner, Nyman Ranch, which operates around 500 pork farms in and around Iowa and the Midwest, some in Pennsylvania, where I'm from. And really, we got involved, I think, back in 2022 when the argument was on its way to the Supreme Court. We joined them and we both sent amicus briefs, which are kind of like I think I'm in the audience of people who know what that is. So we penned our own amicus brief and joined Nyman in that. And then last February, I realized that there just weren't a lot of private companies because we're all kind of small and there aren't always people in my seat. Like very rarely does a private company have a government relations or a government affairs person. So I realized that when we were having these conversations with our legislators, that the private sector wasn't showing up unless it was the big meat. And so we decided to reach out to all of our kind of friends and honestly competitors in the industry to say, like, we've put together a letter, we want to send it to Congress. please read it. And we were able to get, in a matter of like 2 to 3 weeks, we had 24 companies sign on, including Bon Appetit, Whole Foods, Thrive Market, many pork producers across different scales. And I'm really proud that we were able to do that so quickly because it was just a very no nonsense piece of legislation to get, but or our pitch was no nonsense. And unfortunately, the battle is still going on. We spoke with Eric Sorensen's office recently, and he definitely has not heard enough from folks about this. And it's honestly tiring to keep having this argument about, for us, it's about pork and crate free, and the fact that if you see a pregnant sow in a gestation crate, she literally can just stand up and sit down for 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. And then once she has her babies, she might get a little reprieve and then she's back in that crate. And I've talked about this issue for a really long time, but when I saw a crate myself, like I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it right now. It's just inhumane at its core. And I think ButcherBox is so proud to work with our producers, Nyman Ranch, Bon Appetit, and other companies to keep this from keep it out of the Farm Bill, and then move on to more meaningful change for animal welfare at the federal level.
Yep. Maisie will bounce to you and then over to Zach.
Yeah, well, I definitely underscore what Mark and Kelly have said, and I would add to that also sending letters to food companies. I can tell you, we had a misunderstanding, and it looked like we were not doing something related to broiler welfare, that we actually were. But our CEO got about a dozen emails from random people. They weren't from our customers necessarily, from random people, and that lit him on fire. 12 emails. It eventually grew over about a week to 50 emails before I could get it straightened out and get the organization to understand that we actually were in compliance and stuff. And you would have thought that like the heavens had rained down on him. Like 50 emails into his personal email was it. You would have thought it had been thousands. All companies have people in them like Kelly and myself that are working on these issues that have varying degrees of power. We happen to be lucky or have chosen wisely to work for companies where leadership cares about these issues at all levels, but that's not always the case. And so anything that you can do as a consumer to help build that case for those middle managers, those supply chain people that are trying to make improvements, you never want them to go into a meeting and have the executive team say, well, no customers ever asked us about this. I've never heard of it from a customer. Make sure they have. And even, I promise you, a few questions makes a difference. Just so they say, oh, well, we didn't get any other questions about our supply chain, but all of a sudden we got like 5 questions about gestation crates. What does that issue mean? Why are they talking about it? You can, with very little, very small numbers, create a lot of impact at a corporation. So write to them too.
Absolutely. And Zach.
I'll keep mine short and sweet. To go back in, but voting with your fork. We make 3 decisions every single day, at least 3 decisions every day of what we're going to eat. And those decisions have impact. And it's one of the, the consumers want this. It's one of the most impactful things we can do. So simple as, shopping for meats with ButcherBox or supporting a restaurant. I think that those are quick, easy decisions that we're always making every day that have great impact. But I want to re-highlight, the work that has to be done on a grand scale, with working with politicians and these large food producers to make the biggest difference the quickest. And, it's what we all want, but we got to let people know that we want it.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with Illinois Stewardship Alliance here in Illinois, you should be. They're the leading policy advocate for the local food and farm community. And they do a lot. I participated in one of the lobby days last week at Springfield. They are always in touch with our state lawmakers, but they're also acting in coalition with other national organizations to push back against these abrupt and illegal and unfair cuts that this administration has imposed on small local farmers who are just trying to do the right thing. So I urge you to get in touch with them. Jess, you
Yeah.
wanted to say a few words?
Very quickly. Well, we have some Q&A coming up, so I'm going to make this brief because I'm sure there's some questions. But I want to thank the very thoughtful comments. And if this kind of topic excites you and you want to think about it a little bit more, I'm always looking for out of the box thinking on ways to connect and influence leaders of food companies to really care about this topic. So outside on the front table, I created a sheet that says, do you want to keep working on this? Please leave me your contact information because I love talking to people of all backgrounds to see if we could keep coming up with innovative ways to get this done. Now, I know there's the legal aspect, which I'm a big supporter of, but then, there's also that private sector. So that's what I'm always looking for, more ways to deal with that. So like I said, there's a sign-up sheet out there, and I want to thank everyone for coming, and now we'll do some Q&A.
Well, just one
Yes.
little quick thing
Wait,
about
wait,
Local
wait.
Food Forum.
Okay.
You can find it at localfoodforum.com. Don't bother writing. I've got cards. And we also publish a Local Food Forum newsletter on Substack. That's how it all started at localfoodforum.substack.com, which is also where you can sign up to subscribe. Through April, we're collaborating with Farmers Rising, which is an amazing farmer training nonprofit near Rockford, with 20% of the proceeds from all new subscriptions being donated to the organization. So give it some thought. With that, questions?
A couple. I'll start off with Zach, as you're on the ground level, taking the food from the farm and putting it on my plate, and I thank you very much for that. And in that process, it sounds like you've cut out several middlemen, which I would say are all taking their slice of the pie. So you've actually done an economic end around to this. The food comes out of the animal factory, goes into the freezers, goes to the trucks, goes to the, and all that costs money that is, yeah, I can make the pork sandwich a little bit cheaper, and then you gotta pay for this and this and this to get it to your restaurant. I like that model when you were talking about what's the way to change this dynamic and say, hey, even me going to my local restaurant and said, where do you get your food from? I bet you could get it cheaper if you went over here. All right. Jess said something earlier that I'd like to have a little bit of would be a good wedge, because like just about everybody has had a pet in their life. And when you talk about how we treat our pets, and then you turn around and talk about how we treat our factory animals, it's animal abuse. So if your pet's somebody you can, or an animal that you can relate to and love and cherish and remember when they passed, how in the world can you put up with the abuse to all these other animals? But last question I'd like to ask, can you tell the flavor, the difference in the flavor? And I'd like to ask everyone.
I'm gonna let Zach lead off on that because I think so.
Absolutely. When animals are given the time that they need and given the exercise that they need and given the diet that they need, the proof is in the pudding. Yes, absolutely. It definitely tastes better. It's better for you. It's better for the planet. It can be all of those things. Going back to the first question, about the affordability of these products. I think that's a lot of that is tied up with, government cuts to a lot of these large corporations. That why does a chicken coming, or why does a vegetable coming from Mexico cost less than a vegetable coming from my farmer's backyard. And all these subsidies, that were created a long time ago haven't gone away. And, so the meat that I'm getting, that I'm just working with the farmer, they're delivering it and that's still more expensive. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So the scalability of this, there does need to be some legal or government influence to make those changes, to make these things continue to grow. So I hope that kind of addresses your question.
I think you almost
And
asked
Kelly,
Mark's
you're in the same position because, to get people to buy your products and maybe pay a little bit of a premium, you have to persuade them that it really is that much better.
Yeah, and I think I'll go back to kind of my public health background, whether you care about the animal most or you care about, I would say most consumers our customers say that they care about kind of what they're feeding their family the most. And that it's important that we are able to articulate that higher quality on your plate is a direct result of different practices, that farmers and producers make intentional decisions to give more space to their animals. And, just pasture raised, it's beautiful to think about, but that means they're eating a diverse diet. And yeah, I think it's just explaining how practices connect to a higher quality product on your plate. And then the other piece is just saying, like, the conventional industry and the practices that they're using have negative impacts of on the water quality in the communities where their CAFOs exist. And so it's kind of like, do you want to pay for cheap meat, or do you want to invest in your health? Because I think ultimately, whether it's water quality or antibiotics in your meat, like, cheap meat is not cheap. And I think that is not the easiest story to tell when folks don't understand this general status quo. And so consumer education is certainly something we need to continue to improve and tell that story. But I can tell you that when we do use those messages, it resonates.
Yeah, and I've gone pretty much all in on pasture-raised meat. In fact, I just started my first meat CSA the other day. But I first started learning about it when I first started shopping at Whole Foods Market, probably late 80s, early 90s, and Coleman Meat was talking about, their grass-fed meat. The seminal conversation I had was about 10 years ago. Rob Levitt, who's now the head butcher at Public and Quality Meats in West Loop. I've known him for a lot of years, and he was explaining that if you have a piece of pasture-raised beef, size of your hand, size of a deck of cards, as they like to say, that it is so much richer. It is so much, the nutrient density is so much greater that you can achieve satiety with that. That is the same as a plateful of conventionally raised meat. And that really I kind of drove the whole question home.
And I love that hook about using animals to your advantage. We have that conversation with an elected. It's pretty powerful, and most electeds have a pet. They usually have a dog or a cat, if not more, of other species. And when you bring up, well, would you be okay with a dog, your dog, being in a crate for 3 months that can't move? Well, hell no. But why is it okay for this pig? And it's, oh, well, it's different. Why is it different? And then you have that conversation. It's, well, because they're so far removed from that process of raising them, being housed with them, seeing how they're being raised and then treated, then ultimately killed. They're removed from all of it because they're all inside an intensive confinement. They don't see any of it. And so we do show pictures and video. And then of course I don't want to look at that because seeing is believing at that point and they just can't take it. But I think it's a great hook to use that to your advantage because you're right. If that was a companion animal, I'd have you in jail for that. And I think we have a long way to go in treating farm animals the same way as companion animals in the state and every other state for that matter. We have felony penalties for every abuse category for companion, nothing for farm, zero, nothing.
Yeah, and I might say the local farmer, we know our animals.
Right. Yeah, and it's always a matter of conscience. And, you know, if you really care, then you have, in order to be an omnivore, in order to be a carnivore, you have to be comfortable with what you're doing. And so that's why it became a value to me. That one bad day, you know, principle with pasture raised meat, animals raised with care, where I could make that compromise. And even with that, my wife and I have a bad case of cute animal syndrome. You know, so we never eat rabbit, we never eat. Veal is a big thing of mine because she was raised on a dairy farm. And the calves would be pets and then they come home from school one day and the calves would be gone.
Yeah.
Is there time for one more question? No.
Well, we have 15 minutes and we have questions online.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, please do, please do.
And
What
I have
would,
one question.
Can I,
Sure.
can I have a question? I'm sorry. Do we have room for?
Yeah, we have to, go
Okay.
ahead, but he's got one that's
I have a
on.
couple
Go
of,
ahead, go ahead.
what ways can other players in the food industry, such as research, chefs, and food scientists, support education and advocacy efforts?
Maisie, you wanna weigh in?
Can you just say it one more
Sure.
time?
What ways can other players in the food industry, such as research, chefs, and food scientists, support education and advocacy efforts?
Well,
So
I
I-
was just gonna say that, where I have most often in my dealings run into research chefs or sorry, food scientists, because at Bon Appetit, we don't buy a lot of processed products, so I'm not in our supply chain talking to that many food scientists. But it's very common when you go to see a farm and you talk to a farming family, that somebody from that family will go to school to become a food scientist. That if they're gonna get an off-farm job, that's often a path that they take. And I think it's important that those people who then wind up going to these large ag schools are consistently encouraged to bring the stories of their family farms into that arena as well, that they don't leave their past to go work for the big food processors of the world. So I think just continuing to celebrate those stories and to give them value whenever you have the opportunity.
Kelly, you wanna respond and then we'll go over to you.
Yeah, sure, just quickly. So there are a couple different organizations that do testing related to nutrient density in foods, whether it's produce or meat. There's one called the Bionutrient Institute. And so I think there are startups and new companies and research institutions, one in which we've funded some work called the Noble Research Institute, which is looking into how raising cows on pasture improves both the economic prosperity for a farmer as well as the soil quality. But I think there's definitely on the research side, nutrient density and kind of the higher quality. I think it's all something that we inherently feel, that if you raise an animal better and it's able to move on its own and move and behavior naturally, it probably tastes better. But the science isn't actually as robust as I would say it needs to be for someone like me to like put that on a brand message. Because I have a public health training, I have a high standard for what is evidence to me. So I think we need a larger body of evidence that demonstrates that changing the way you raise animals actually leads to better health or, better outcomes. So.
Even if we really believe it. You.
Thanks for doing this, by the way. I
Oh,
learned
you're-
about this yesterday and was over the moon to
I'm glad you
kind of
were
learn
able to
more
make it.
about this. And, as somebody who is very interested and cares about animals a lot in the environment as well, thinking about the kind of the industry overall and the industry kind of moving a little bit more closely to lab grown meat and also no meat at all diets, and people focusing a little bit more. I mean, just with Pepsi buying Poppy and kind of, it's not meat related, but
Yeah.
health food related. I mean, what are your thoughts on, and even with, legislation and also with the meat industry and sales of meat, and elevating that, but also moving away toward no meat at all. Do you have any thoughts about, have you seen a push for kind of no meat options? I appreciate the humanity for human or for animals, but any thoughts, or do you see more popularity with these sort of options, or how's it affecting your business and the conversations you're having with people?
It's an awesome space to be in, that area. I mean, we'll plug another organization, the Good Food Institute, is doing remarkable work in that space. And I think that dovetail off the previous question, because I think consumers and even companies are getting interested in that kind of that lab grown area because of different purposes. It's certainly, the environmental aspect is huge. If you can grow, let's say at some point, an entire calf without any water, without all the food, all the CO2 emissions, no methane emissions, what that does, I mean, to the environment alone is astounding. And to the environment, that's astounding. And I think that's creating some interest in consumer demand. And then the aspects of like famine, like could that be used to grow large amounts of food for famines and food insecurity, that people that don't have access to good, clean and quality meat, could that be used for that? So there's aspects for that to be used there. And I think because these things are catching on, it's also got industry scared, like they always are. And so there was an attempt, I think 3 or 4 years ago, where industry filed a bill, and there was numerous filed in different states, that tried slapping a negative label on that food, even though it's not even commercially available yet, to say contains stem cells. As like it contains something bad, you know, and as a negative, so you wouldn't buy it. Remember, it wasn't even available yet, but they're trying to get ahead of it and say, don't even worry about that product. It's bad. It contains some nasty things. Don't buy it, because they know that things like that, the lab grown, the cultivated meats, that is some of the cutting edge of that space for certainly animal welfare concerns, but also all the environmental things that it addresses along with it. But I don't think it's even commercially available yet, but I think they're very close to getting there with it.
Yeah, I would say, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would say that, you know, outside of where I sit at Butcher Box, I personally have some skepticism around the environmental sustainability of whether it's that whole space, because the meat needs to grow in a culture and it needs to have some sort of input, whether it's sugar or corn or soy. And I have a lot of concerns about where that's being sourced and how that is extractive or detrimental to the environment where it's being grown. And obviously corn and soy in this country and in other countries is not grown well. So I think in general, what I know is that 8 out of 10 Americans, and this is from 2024 data, still consider themselves meat eaters. And so what I would hope for is that we can eat less but better meat, because while I personally do want to see a world where there's more vegetarians and there's more people thinking consciously when they do choose meat, I just don't see consumer opinion shifting as quickly as it needs to for the environmental crisis. And so that's why I think having education around the growth of better, but less, but better is really important too.
Well, and I think to your point too, you mentioned that most of your customers are people that their primary focus is they want their family to eat healthier meat. They're not necessarily focused on the animal welfare. It's just a kind of a bonus cherry on the top of the sundae type of thing, effect. But people still aren't there yet with their mentality of purchasing and what they prefer.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that's developing in terms of animal agriculture and the environment is the rise of regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is all about rebuilding and repairing our nation's damaged soils, protecting soil health. And a lot of people believe that it also enhances carbon sequestration. Animals are a key part in most regenerative agricultural system in terms of rotational grazing. They eat the grass, they poop, they rebuild the fields, and that's kind of changing the dynamic a little bit. I mean, plant-based had a huge spike in the last decade. It's still popular. There's still a lot of people. There are people who are completely vegan and vegetarian, so they need to have those products. But the growth has been less explosive. So I think people are kind of finding ways of mixing and matching all those things to achieve at least part of the goal of a better for people, better for the planet food system.
Mark, you touched on the tariff impact, maybe go into that a little deeper.
Well, I think we'll hopefully know more, maybe by the day. It seems like there's always changing data on what tariff is being put forward and then the tariffs rescinded and so it's hard to know the actual impact, but I think we can draw good conclusions from the previous administration that did the exact same thing before when China put forth all the retaliatory tariffs on pork and other meat products that devastated American farmers, which was kind of the base of that administration, which was an odd target to hit for some reason. I think the data is still out on what the new tariffs here are doing or going to do for farmers. I know grain's being hit extremely hard right now. Soy is being hit. I'm not sure if that's kind of branched into pork and poultry sales just yet. It probably will if this goes on any longer. But that's gonna devastate more farmers and hopefully, I would argue, benefit the local family farmer that doesn't rely upon China to export its goods to. And I think it could be an awesome blessing in some ways to the local family farmers here in the States. So that's the data is still out, but I'm thinking that if it does go forward, it's probably good for the local farmer and not the big CAFOs.
Are we going to, and do we have any more online questions?
Yeah, just what plans do you have for more exposure of this kind?
I've got one.
I mean, doing more events like this and yeah, I mean, Jazz, you want to do more events like this in the future? Yeah, no, I'm always happy to
Next
talk.
week.
We'll do it next week. No, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, we file bills every year talking about farm animal protection. I mean, it's certainly a heavy topic in Illinois because we're filing the bills every year here. So it's always kind of front and center with our animal welfare population. But I think it's definitely a conversation that needs to be ongoing and have a variety of speakers like we have today. I think it's been pretty healthy dialogue.
There's a group, it's a worldwide organization called Green Drinks, and it's aptly named. It's just people gathering over drinks to talk about well, it could be business networking, but it's also just about green topics. And we host one once a month at Duke's too, but it really connects you with everybody in the world, but it also connects you with your community. And we bring in speakers and stuff like that to, for people to really get in touch with and do these things to make a difference and stay in touch and stay on top of the topic. So search out Green Drinks. I'm sure there's plenty available in whatever town or city you're in. So that's a great resource for expanding this conversation.
And I mentioned I
suburb
do
are you
this
in?
publication called Local Food Forum.
Sorry?
Which suburb are you in?
Crystal Lake. So a little bit of a hike from here.
So one more and then we'll make this the last question. So you can go back there.
Yeah, and so this was kind of a downer question, but what about slaughter? So that's like that one bad day.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people also probably would care about that one bad day that you cannot get around. And also if we're thinking about our pets, many of us would not want to think about our pets going from living to not living in that way. So what in the work that you all do, what addresses how these animals are transported to slaughter, how they are killed? Is that different in any way, or is that kind of the process that all the animals go through?
Mark, you want to?
I mean, it's a toughie. I mean, we don't, it's not addressed directly, and because I think we all know what it means ultimately. They are being done in accordance to like the AVMA standards, or to make it as humane as possible, to have the quickest death possible where there's no suffering. I'm hoping that's being adhered to as best as they possibly can with industry. But even we got a lot of heat, even from some likely ally organizations of ours that were saying your cage-free egg bill isn't even good. We don't even want that. We want pasture raised. I mean, you're still raising these chickens in huge barns and they're not even seeing daylight. And we're like, well, yes, but we have to move the needle. And so we're still trying to convince folks that we can move the needle by doing this bill. They're still going to have to be slaughtered, obviously, but we're not even at the point of talking about different ways of slaughter because we can't even convince folks yet to go towards cage-free, let alone other issues. That's a tough argument, but it's.
I want to say something about
Yeah.
the slaughter. It's a really important topic. And for instance, there's no state laws about slaughter. There's 2 federal laws.
Right.
And one of them is being challenged right now, and that's the line speed with the slaughter. That there used to be, the animals have to be completely unconscious, and so when they're all hanging on a line, and they have to be in a tank a long enough period of time so that they're completely unconscious when they're slaughtered. So that line has been going way too fast, and the animals don't have a chance to become unconscious. So a few years ago, I don't remember, maybe it was Obama, but a few years ago, a law was passed to slow down that line speed. But now, of course, that law has gone away and the lines can zoom through as quickly as possible and the animals are unconscious. So that's just happening right now. So that's federal
Federal,
legislation. So, I think about that a lot too. I mean, still that one bad day. So I think one of the trends that I'm seeing, and I don't know how, I'm not really focused on that, but it's of interest to me, and this is slaughter becoming more local. Like there's
Right.
more and more farms that are doing the slaughterhouse kind of is on wheels, or they do it, or they have a building that on their farm that's dedicated to slaughter. So the animals never have to leave the
Truck,
property. Yeah, they just go from one barn to another, and it's done on a much slower scale, like 1-to-1. I mean, that to me is the only solution I know of. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the one bad day that you just.
There are a couple solutions at like the marketing level that folks can look for. So I know we're kind of getting close to time, but so the Certified Humane and Global Animal Partnership, part of those standards does cover how long an animal is transported. And that actually does it's completely restricted our ability to grow grass-fed, grass-finished beef in the United States. So we source a lot of our grass-fed, grass-finished from Australia because of the fact that processing is so confined to the big 4 in this country that we can't get time on the lines. And so because of the fact that we have high animal welfare standards and that is translated to transportation as well, we couldn't get enough small partners together to aggregate enough for our demands. So that's, I think if you look for those labels, you can really trust that even the bad day is held to a higher standard, or the transport. And then the other piece I'll mention is within poultry, there is something called the Better Chicken Commitment, which means, and you can go probably on betterchickenproject.com or org. There's now within the poultry industry some standards around controlled atmospheric stunning, which is kind of what Jess alluded to. And I think we have some of our proteins have that label on them, and I think looking for that is important.
Find that a little bit for everybody.
Define controlled atmospheric stunning. I think the easiest way to say it is that they're exposed to a chemical that's like helping reduce consciousness to an extent that they really to what Jess was saying. And if you know more about it, I was just gonna do layman's terms.
From being on the farm and having animals go down. A long time ago, I found out that if I used an inert gas and allowed them to pass away, breathing the inert gas, they didn't panic, they didn't hurt, they would just slowly fall asleep. I would get usually one death kick from a leg, and they were gone.
And quickly, that's why I still think that your question goes so well with yours, because it's about, there are some people that that one bad day is still not good enough for people. That if you go to that lab grown situation, there is no animal to kill. And so that's why I think that that's generating such unique interest and funding and research into that space. We're not quite there yet with it, but I think that's predominantly why it's being pursued, is there's nothing to euthanize at that point. There's no slaughter at all. But we can talk about how that's being raised and how where the nutrients are coming from. But I think it's a kind of a neat question that dovetails off yours pretty well.
Yeah, and that whole transport question is a huge one, because when the conventional agricultural system moved in, and as you say, the big four took over almost all animal processing, the local processing plants away. So you have so many small local farmers who are taking such good care of these animals, and they have to drive them 200 or 300 miles away to get them processed, and that's shameful. Well, thank you, everybody. This is a great conversation. Thank you. Everybody, thank you.